Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a totally mind-bending economic phenomenon, the anatomy of hyperinflation. We're going to break down exactly what causes it and look at the historic crises that literally wiped out entire economies basically overnight. All right, let's just kick things off with a staggering number, 41.9 quadrillion percent. No, that is not a typo on your screen. That is Hungary's world record monthly inflation rate from July 1946. It's a shocking hook, right? But it sets the stage perfectly for what we're looking at today. We're going to figure out exactly how economies collapse to this extreme degree and the real-world impact that has on everyday people. So here's our roadmap for today. We've got mechanics of hyperinflation, Weimar Germany's paper mountains, Hungary's record, Zimbabwe's trillions, Venezuela's crisis, and finally, restoring trust. Let's get right into it. Section 1, Mechanics of Hyperinflation, the domino effect. Before we jump into the history books, we really need to understand the underlying machinery here. You see, hyperinflation isn't just your normal everyday inflation running a little hot. It's defined as an extreme, rapid increase in prices as a nation's currency just rapidly loses its value and purchasing power. It's a vicious cycle, and it almost always starts with a perpetual budget deficit, meaning the government is spending way more than it collects. So to cover these mounting debts, central banks are forced into excessive money printing. And by printing more and more currency to finance that debt, the value of the money just plummets. This severe currency devaluation instantly triggers rapidly rising prices. It's a classic domino effect. Let's just pause for a quick second here. What would you do if your paycheck lost half of its value by tomorrow morning? Seriously, let us know in the comments. It sounds like the plot of a dystopian movie, right? But for millions of people throughout history, this rapid loss of purchasing power was their actual daily reality. Which brings us to Section 2, Weimar Germany's paper mountains, debts and devaluation. Post-World War I Germany actually shows this domino effect in devastating action. During the First World War, the German Emperor and the Reichstag made an incredibly fateful decision. They decided to fund their war effort entirely by borrowing, rather than raising taxes. By 1918, they had racked up 166 billion marks in national debt. And then that was soon compounded by massive reparations. This created a terrifying daily reality. Get this. A loaf of bread in Berlin cost about 160 marks in late 1922. Fast forward just 1 year to late 1923, and that exact same loaf cost 200 billion marks. $1 equaled an unimaginable 4.2 trillion marks. It just utterly crushed the purchasing power of everyday German citizens. Now, comparing this to our next historical era really puts the crisis in perspective. In Weimar Germany, prices doubled every 3.7 days, which is a devastating 20.9% daily inflation rate. But post-World War II Hungary, well, that makes Germany's crisis look almost slow, because over there, prices were doubling every 15 hours. Yes, you heard that right, 15 hours. Section 3, Hungary's world record inflation, the peak of the crisis. The aftermath of World War II left Hungary deeply scarred, and it birthed the absolute worst inflation crisis ever recorded. The war completely devastated Hungary's infrastructure. And to understand the scale of the resulting crisis, our sources use an atoms to apples analogy. Remember that 41.9 quadrillion percent monthly inflation rate in July 1946 we mentioned earlier? Well, let's convert that to an equivalent daily rate, 207%. Imagine prices tripling every single day. This catastrophic environment absolutely obliterated 80% of the real value of workers' wages. To cope with prices doubling every 15 hours, the Hungarian government actually printed the highest denomination banknote in human history, the 100 trillion pengo note. That is a 1 followed by 20 zeros. It's just wild. Eventually, the government did successfully stabilize the economy in August 1946, and they did that by introducing a completely new currency, the forint, which wiped 29 zeros off the currency entirely. So could you imagine spending $100 trillion bill just for basic groceries? Just doing the mental math with 20 zeros to buy a carton of eggs is completely mind-boggling. Comment your thoughts below on how you'd even handle that. Moving right along to Section 4, Zimbabwe's trillion-dollar bills, a 21st century collapse. Because hyperinflation, it isn't just ancient history. By November 2008 in Zimbabwe, after years of economic mismanagement, the central bank massively increased the money supply just to pay government debts.
It got so bad that the government actually temporarily stopped publishing official inflation data to try and hide the unprecedented meltdown. But at its peak, Zimbabwe's monthly inflation hit 79.6 billion%. A $100 trillion banknote literally couldn't even pay for a simple bus fare.
So the really crucial point here is how they survived it. In April 2009, Zimbabwe finally abandoned its broken currency. To restore trust, they adopted foreign currencies, primarily the US dollar. And while this stabilized the immediate crisis, severe inflation struggles actually returned a decade later when they tried to reintroduce a local currency without fixing the underlying systemic issues first.
Section 5, Venezuela's modern economic crisis, oil and instability. This brings us to the most severe ongoing inflation crisis in the world right now.
Venezuela's trajectory of collapse really began in the early 2000s. The country was once one of the wealthiest in Latin America, thanks to abundant oil resources. But they suffered from something called the Dutch disease. Basically, developing an unsustainable reliance on oil exports while totally neglecting other sectors. So when global oil prices plunged in 2015, the economy was completely exposed. This triggered a major recession in 2016, and by 2018, inflation peaked at a staggering 65,370%. But falling oil prices don't tell the whole story here. Three key sociopolitical determinants combine to lock the country into a hyperinflationary spiral. First, aggressive status policies that overextended the economy. Second, a strong presence of illegal shadow markets that severely disrupted market equilibrium. And third, the personal dictatorship under the Chavez-Maduro administration, which ultimately led to international sanctions and massive capital flight. Which brings us to a really important concept to ponder. Do you think an economy can rely solely on natural resources, like oil, without risking a major crash? Share your opinions below. The Dutch disease is a super dangerous trap for national economies that looks like a total blessing, right up until the market turns. Finally, Section 6, Restoring Trust and Stability, the Path to Recovery. How do nations actually escape these seemingly bottomless economic pits? To understand the cure, we really have to look at a final mechanism of the disease, the Oliver Tanzi effect. Now, this happens when rapid inflation causes a massive delay between when a tax is assessed and when it's actually collected and spent. Basically, by the time the government gets the tax money, its real purchasing power has already plummeted. This leads to wider deficits, which in turn forces the government to print even more money, accelerating the crisis. Escaping this vicious cycle requires operating balanced budgets, an absolute halt to excessive money printing, and securing international financial support to reset the entire system. And that leads us to our final thought for this explainer. If government deficits and excessive money printing are the universal determinants of these historic collapses, we have to ask, is separating the money printer from political leaders ensuring absolute central bank independence the ultimate stabilizing force, or is there a better way to ensure economic trust?